Oh, isn't it? No, no. I want to.
Right, well we just assume that this is everybody, is that okay? And if you're not here for a shallow, cheerful, anti-intellectual, pathetic, basic round off to the day, leave now and go and see somebody clever, okay? And it started, guys. It started because in the background, as I'm speaking, and some of those of you who are gifted in the hearing department will have recognised this, Etta James is singing. And she's singing the song that politicians love to sing in relation to educational research, which is, I would rather go blind. Or alternatively, I see no ships. And that's my theme for today, which is the invisibility and invisibility of educational research. And what I'm going to try and do, here's the plan. What I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and dip in and out a bit. I'm going to start off talking a bit about some English stuff. And then once I've berated them, once I've done that entire country south of the border down, ground it into the dust of intellectual, ideologically driven academic oppression, I'm then going to turn my attention to Scotland and hopefully kind of do something vaguely similar to that. I'm then going to rant a bit about research, and then towards the end I'm going to get into a general kind of vibe about some latecomers. They heard that this was easier. These are like people who've opted to take history because the teacher's a good laugh. Right? You'll learn nothing, but the teacher's a great laugh. So anyway, towards the end I'm going to climax. Not literally, you've been relieved to hear. I've reached an age where even that becomes challenging. But I'm going to work my way towards a big finish around why it actually matters that we need to get on with this stuff and what we need to do about it. Is that alright? As my friend and colleague Hal Roberts would say, is that alright? Is that alright? Brilliant, buzzing. Okay, I'm off. So, Michael Fullan, and it was Andy Hargreaves opened this up. Michael Fullan was invited to do some work in England, and he carried out a deep audit and assessment of their strategies, and he told them loads of things. He gave them 4 bits of advice, looking at what happened, and here were his 4 messages. You know, you don't have to have punitive accountability practices in your system. They don't work. That's the first thing he told them. And the second thing he told them was, don't become obsessed by targets. Okay, that's important too. And thirdly, having a focus on a small number of goals gives the best opportunity for success. And finally, capacity building among teachers and leaders was crucial. And as you'll probably appreciate, Michael Gove, obviously, at that time, the Minister for Education took that advice deeply to heart and established Ofsted, who've continued to work on a basis of exposure, threat and virtual bullying. Ofsted are kind of like commercial travelling salesmen used to be. They roam the country having affairs, they're always kiss and tell. They never establish a relationship, they just come in, screw around with you for a while, and then they go away and they tell you how it was for them, outstanding and special measures. They're always kiss and tell affairs, however, because they tell everybody else in the world as well. And that's supposed to drive people to improve. The jury's out, I think, on that one. And then don't become obsessed with targets. Well, again, Gove obviously chortled the laughter around that and moved on and did something different. And the reality is that confronted with that attitude towards research, we were warned at the same time that this was what we needed to be worried about. We needed to worry about the blob. And the blob was the expression that was used to describe the educational hierarchy. People working in teacher training institutions, and just in case none of you appreciate how awful the threat of the blog was,
Hey, what the
I thought I'd just let you see this trailer for it, just so that you can appreciate it.
Now, wait a minute, Steve. Tell us what happened. Well, I'm trying to tell you that this thing had killed a doc. Well, what was it? Stop with it, kid. But it's kind of like a mass that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
watching this screen, look out, because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster man has ever conceived will be oozing into this theater. 2 teenagers see it first, like a falling star from outer space.
What else? Close. Come on, I want to see if I can find it.
An old man finds it, touches it, and this is the shocking result. From then on, there's no stopping the blob as it spreads from town to town.
I know you're enjoying it too much, but I'm not going to really watch any more of it, because I can see some of the younger people in the audience are becoming alarmed by it. But that was the line that was taken by Gove and others around what they described as the academic and research community, and it's something that's been continued, and interestingly, it's part of the vocabulary of research ed as well. You know, there's a brilliant photograph which I've seen on Twitter of some of the leading lights of research ed describing themselves as the new bloc. The reality is that what that does is it actually attacks, cheapens and undermines all form of academic research activity. It trivializes it and reduces it and speaks volumes about the political regard for the value of research. So it's entirely appropriate that we open up and question what is in the minds of people who use that form of stereotyping for people who rightly or wrongly think about and investigate the possibilities of learning. And if you want to see further, just think about that, because I think there's an awful lot in that Malcolm X quote about the newspapers. If you're not careful about the newspapers, they'll have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing it. You know, if you just think about that in relation to migrants. Feel sorry for them if they're in Syria, but if they get anywhere near Cali, give them shit. Right? That's the reality we've been presented with. And I think there's a similar reality around much of the political diatribe and dialogue around education, and particularly around educational research. And I think we need to be very careful and cautious about what we're doing when we're talking about that. And as far as some of the Gove stuff's concerned, I think this is quite an interesting clip.
No life can be better spent than in teaching. We honour the work our teachers do. We salute the sacrifices they make, and we applaud their commitment to our children. I will stop pressing, pushing, or fighting and inspiring already passed legislation. We will target those schools. We'll take radical action to deal with those schools. Because this radical reforming coalition government has declared war.
Workload has dashed the hopes of thousands more parents, teachers, and
I think
pupils.
teachers feel very alarmed when they see the speed at which the government is moving to essentially dismantle state education.
What is intolerable is that he has cynically raised the hopes of hundreds of thousands
I couldn't live myself. If having been given the chance to serve, I put the enjoyment of office before the power to do good. One of the tragedies of the last 10 years has been our failure as a country to keep pace with the world's best education system. In the most recent PISA survey, we've plummeted down the international league tables from 4th to 16th place in science, 7th to 17th in literacy, and we've plummeted from being 8th in the world for the quality of our children in mathematics to 2024.
After the 2006 round of PISA, I pointed out that actually the country had improved because the number of countries had doubled.
Taking care to avoid making comparisons which could be interpreted as statistically problematic.
The international comparisons stop. We've plummeted down the international league tables.
Graham Stewart said that you're risking a mess and you need to stop taking the urgency pills.
Well, every morning I wake up and I take as many urgency pills as I can. And my message, get out of the way. Becoming an academy is a liberation. It gives heads real freedom to make a difference. Longer school days, better paid teachers, innovative approaches to the curriculum. The principle of autonomy and improvement is solidly backed by rigorous international evidence.
There is no high-performing system in the world that operates on the basis of we'll make every school autonomous and good things will happen.
The Academics program is not, as you all know, about ideology. The real ideals are the enemies of the Academics program and the enemies of promise.
Don't want Michael Grove gambling with my children's education.
They said that our promises of rising standards were overblown. The percentage point increase in pupils achieving 5 good GCSEs in reading English and maths was double that of other schools.
This is a very impressive graph about academies. From 2008 to 2011, they marvellously went up by 19%. These are schools, each of which has had millions pumped into them. But bringing the non-academies, and lo and behold, they went up by an almost identical amount.
Some 55 new free schools will be opening this month. They're state-funded, but not under local authority control.
In Sweden, academic studies confirm that pupils at these schools get better results than pupils at traditional schools.
Research from Sweden has said quite clearly there's been an increase in racial and social division in schools where the free schools have been set up, and evidence that educational standards have actually started to fall.
In America, where the charter school system implemented by New York and Chicago is perhaps the quintessential model of school autonomy, the results are extraordinary.
A Stanford University survey of charter schools in 16 states offers a mixed academic report card. Nearly half showed no difference, and more than 1/3 of the charter schools were actually worse than their public school counterparts.
There has been a lot of concern about the level of profit making, and they tend to say that they do really well. The independent research is showing that they're not performing very well.
We believe it is time for the race to the bottom to end. We believe that it is time to tackle dumbing down, and we believe that it is time to raise aspirations and to restore rigour. I'd like to give professionals more freedom, but I know what's best.
That's exactly the point, isn't it? That is the incoherence, because you can't resist coming out with a prescriptive list.
Pope, Dryden, Keats, Shelley, Swift, Byron, Milton's verse, Newton's breakthrough, Leibniz's genius. We urgently need to ensure that our children study rigorous disciplines instead of pseudo-subjects.
I quoted, the self-directed learner's responsibility for their learning questions reflects and perseveres in the pursuit of learning, capable and resilient, knows themselves as discerning in judgment, thinks independently. That's the aims of the curriculum in Singapore.
Well, let me be clear. It is time to restore rigour.
He said this about rigour. Actually, rigour is achieved through engaging, imaginative, high-quality and creative teaching, not through dispiriting, fact-only based rote learning. That's not a recipe for rigour, it's a recipe for rigor mortis.
Teaching role matters. I think it's the noblest profession, the highest calling. And I want teaching to be a much more respected profession in this country.
Morale amongst teachers has dropped dramatically. The figures are quite staggering, actually. Just 5% felt that this current coalition government's impact on the education system was positive. The government is attacking pay and conditions.
The school teachers review body does recommend much greater freedom to individual schools to set pay in line with performance.
Is that code for doing away with national pay awards?
It's explicit, it's not code. Just plain common sense to pay good teachers more.
The Education Secretary Michael Gove has tonight infuriated unions.
I have a simple message to those union general secretaries. Don't let your ideology hold back our children. This fantastic theory to give all our fellow citizens an equal chance is a reproach to our conscience. It cannot be allowed to continue.
Okay, polemical, and it's not intended at this instance to be an attack particularly on Go, but what it's intended to do is to open up the whole nature of the relationship between politics and research. And it's to open up that whole discussion. And we're now getting into the same game. I mean, if there was one positive step that we might take, it could be the confiscation of politicians' passports. Because the next time somebody goes off to a country utterly culturally different, with practically no other similarities in contextual terms between that country and Scotland, and comes back with vibrant and vital lessons that we need to adopt into our system, I think I'll throw up. Because that's the stage that we're reaching. Now, I'm not against learning from outside. What I am against, interestingly, is that kind of flawed approach to research. It's the sushi approach to research. And it's people sitting in the intellectual equivalent of your sushi, picking something out of the passing bowl and leaving the next one because it doesn't suit the ideological purpose. And I think what we've got to ask is, are we any better north of the wall? Up here amongst the wildlings and the ice people, are we any better? Because here we go. What have we got happening in Scotland at the moment? Well, we would argue that we are making progress because we've got the OECD conducting some sort of evaluative exercise in terms of whether or not Curriculum for Excellence has been successful. Does anybody know what the starting baseline was against which that progress will be judged? Has anyone got any concept at all, and you're an informed group of people, has anyone in this room got any concept of what the OECD are going to use in order to make a decision as to whether we've achieved improvement in this? And I think what's happening clearly is that in this country, and I'm talking about Scotland here, we're confusing observation and judgment with research and evaluation. It's undoubtedly interesting to bring a group of people in from elsewhere in the world to have a look at what's happening here. But let's not pretend that that in any sense is research and evaluation. It's observation and judgment. They will come and look and see. Is the benchmark that the OECD are going to use the quality and the quality of whatever the report was that they did previously in Scottish education? Does anyone actually know that? And what's actually happening around the OECD research is we're prepping for it. There was a phase when they were here, when the OECD people were here, you couldn't get anybody to answer your phone in Education Scotland. Because it's not a research exercise. It's a different kind of exercise, whatever it is. And who knows what kind of data will be involved, who knows what baseline will be involved. I think it's just interesting to think around that and to ask the question, what happened to the Stirling research? Mark Priestley will be on the panel later on. The work that Mark Priestley did around Curriculum for Excellence I thought was remarkably interesting. And one of the things that came out of Mark's research, there were other people involved, but I'll attribute it to him because he's a nice guy and I like him. But one of the things that was really interesting in his research was he exposed the myth that we went through. Because for years during the implementation of Curriculum for Excellence, people openly said, I fully support the principles of Curriculum for Excellence, when they were absolutely lying. Because what Mark's work and the work of others identifies is that in fact the constructivist model of curriculum, which was built in fundamentally to Curriculum for Excellence, wasn't shared by a huge proportion of Scottish secondary teachers in particular. That they still had a delivery model in terms of how the curriculum should operate. And because that was never opened up and never challenged, it was a debate that was never had. So what happened was we got to the point of examination and then the wheels began to come off. Because we had gone through pretending we were having a discussion uninformed by research or evaluation. And then suddenly we're confronted by a reality with which many teachers felt they couldn't cope. And so there's some really interesting questions as to whether or not we're any better. Because what are the baselines? We talk constantly about raising standards. And the astonishing thing, is it not astonishing just now, that we've got this whole thing around raising attainment and closing the gap? As if somehow or other we'd all been conspiring to lower it for the past 20 years. I mean, how dare anyone present us with the novelty of raising attainment as an educational goal? I mean, did that come as a surprise to anybody in this room? Were you roaming around thinking, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing with these kids? Yeah, no. Well, maybe you could try and make them do better. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Raising attainment, brilliant. Closing the gap. Was anybody trying to widen the gap? Was anybody going in every day going, I know what I'll try and do. I'll try and do these poor kids down. It's just astonishing. But raising attainment for what? Raising attainment for what? One of the impacts of the insight tool, which is the measure that we're using now to inform discussions within schools about performance, is that it responds negatively to schools who would look to reduce subject choices in S3. And a school which followed the government guidelines of potentially 6 subjects moving forward into the senior phase will score more poorly in tariff ratings than one which continues with the old model of 8. So there are perverse incentives being built into the system here without any validity in terms of research, debate or discussion. And again, this idea about the whole idea of raising standards, I mean, my view is that if we are about raising standards, then we are about raising the standards that young people require for learning, life and work. And that's not amenable to one simple measure in terms of attainment. And yet there has been no work done that I'm aware of to establish what the baseline is in some of the higher order skills. So how would we know if we were raising standards in terms of analysis, of innovation, of evaluation, of creativity? How would we begin to determine whether any activity we're undertaking was raising standards? Because there is no baseline. And 12 years into the programme, we're no closer to establishing a baseline that would allow us to determine whether standards were being raised than we were over a decade ago. And the final point that's up here, which I'm really interested in, is the whole thing about the London Challenge. And Nicola Sturgeon went to London, a bit in the style of Dick Whittington, only she didn't apparently turn again, but she went to London and she made an announcement in London schools about raising attainment in Scotland based on the London Challenge. And the interesting thing, and I do some work with Tim Brighouse, and I'm proud to say that he's a colleague and a friend, but he went to his bed that night before Nicola Sturgeon made an announcement. And all of the discussion around the London Challenge was about how ineffective it was. All of the stuff that was coming out was about the ineffectiveness of the London Challenge. The big piece in The Guardian leading up to that had been about the fact that it was the pattern of immigration changing in London that had brought about the changes in performance and progress. He went to bed a loser. He rose the next morning a hero. He rose as the apostle, the John the Baptist of the London Challenge. And we were all about to buy in to that particular faith and cult. The London Challenge suddenly revived in Scotland. The debate continues elsewhere. Now, I'm not making a judgment about the validity of the assertion that the London Challenge should be a model for further improvement. I am certainly putting in a challenge on the basis on which that decision is based. Mark, put your hand up.
See, when you talk about standards, is there not a case that there is I'm thinking that there are William's recent publications about teacher development. When you said there's no evidence base about raising standards, is there not a case that, in terms of PD and a research narrative, that there is robust evidence from Hanship, for example, that the longer a teacher's career goes on, there's a kind of a less effect size in terms of their improvement, in terms of their craft?
Yeah, but the point I'm making, Mark, is not that. The point I'm making is that we have not researched nor established any baseline in terms of, for example, how creative our young people are. We've had an excellence group report on higher order skills, which has been followed by the establishment of an online toolkit in higher order skills. And I have no idea what measures might be used to establish whether or not that was having an effect. I know that it's not, because hardly anybody's using it. Right? And I know that the report's not having an impact, because hardly anybody's read it. But even if they did, I don't know what the starting point is, and that's the point I'm making. The research that you're talking about, I think, is thorough and appropriate, because people look and see where did we begin, and then you look at effect size. How can you establish an effect size without working out what the effect's going to be? And that's the issue. It's the cavalier attitude, I think, to progress and reform. And if you think back, right, there's what we've seen. We commemorated a decade of curriculum for excellence with meltdown. We had teachers crying. Sorry, we actually had kids crying. I think we had some teachers crying too. But we certainly had teachers stressed. We had parents anxious. We finally decluttered the curriculum, but nobody thought that, did you? I mean, there's nobody wandering around Scotland at the moment, I don't think, going, whoa. I mean, how decluttered is this curriculum? There's so much space in it. I was to wander down this massive avenue that's opened up in this decluttered curriculum. anybody I talk to in teaching is concerned, it's more bloody cluttered than ever. I've had English teachers telling me that they cannot simply make people good students in English. They have to teach to the rubrics of National 5, otherwise the kids won't pass. You know, being highly literate, being highly able, having a capacity to deal with text, to deconstruct, to evaluate, to engage with, won't get you through National 5. Because the requirements, the specific requirements of the paper are such that it requires specific and targeted teaching. So the landscape's not decluttered. People still feel under pressure, and they still don't feel that they have time to do those things that were supposed to be at the core and heart of Curriculum for Excellence. Now, I'm not arguing, and don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing against Curriculum for Excellence, I'm not arguing against it as a model. I simply make the observation to you that I can see as much good practice, however one defines good practice, in English schools as in Scottish schools. So that in Scotland, with all of the apparent permissions that we have, people feel the curriculum no more decluttered, and they feel the level of prescription no less weighty than they do in England, if one is to consider that through the existence of good and established practice. John Thompson, well known through the Head Teacher Circle, Head Teachers Roundtable in England, head at Huntington Grammar, would be an outstanding teacher in Scotland without making a single change in his practice. And we need to ask ourselves then, what's happening here in terms of that model? And by the way, we're so successful, we've been such a massive success in terms of decluttering that we've had to set up a working group on tackling bureaucracy. And as a final thought, don't even mention the maths. Was Curriculum for Excellence, was it entirely designed so that you could pass maths in 34% and get an A for just over 40? Right? Was that the purpose? And is that not the conspiracy that we've all entered into? Presumably you've all heard the Russian joke. There is only one. And the Russian joke is that Stalin, Khrushchev and Brezhnev, this joke's going to be totally wasted because people in this room are far too young to remember it. Right, but the three of them are travelling on the Trans-Siberian Railway and it breaks down. And Stalin goes, "This cannot happen! This cannot happen." He was a Tsar as well, that makes two of you. So he was it cannot happen. What we will do now is we will take all of the workers on this train, we will take them off and we will shoot them in full view of the passengers. Unless any of the passengers feel it's acceptable, we'll shoot a random selection of them too. And Khrushchev said, "Joseph, if we kill the drivers, the train won't run. What we need is a radical reform of the education system, of the train system. We need to work harder, we need to look at the technology, we need to look at the management, we need to look at all of the structures around railway, and when we reform them, the trains will run." And Brezhnev says, "No. What we need to do is pull down the blinds, close our eyes, and just pretend the train's still moving." Translate that into the Curriculum for Excellence context, and make it Jack McConnell, Peter Peacock, and Angela Constance. And I think you wouldn't be long before you got parallel. Where Jack McConnell would be saying, what we need to do is reform the curriculum, what we need to do is change everything curricularly and move it forward. And Peter Peacock saying, no, 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 no. What we must do is devote ourselves more to teacher education and ongoing teacher professional development. And when we develop the teacher's curriculum for excellence will work. And then Angela Constance came along and said, "No, let's just pull down the blinds. And we'll invite the OECD in to sing a lullaby." So I think there's some genuine worrying issues around what we're doing here. And at the moment, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're really waiting for the perfect storm this year. And if you're a teacher out there, all I can do is extend to you my deep and profound sympathy. Because there's all the crap that's going to be raining down on you. And I'm fond of saying to teachers that at the moment, if you're a head teacher, it's like being pecked to death by hens. And if you're a teacher, it's like being pecked to death by even more hens. The biggest issue in teachers' lives is workload. It's the tyranny of the immediate. And as I often describe it, if it's not coming down on you from above, it's coming up at you from below. It's like having a shower and a douche at the same time. If you're not getting demands from outside, from the Inspectorate, from Education Scotland, from Scottish Government, whoever it happens to be, it's coming up from parents or kids or the press or the media or whoever it happens to be. That's not a gesture you often see in in-service training. and I'm trying to culture myself out of it. But as if that wasn't enough, now we're adding in, you've got the Wood Commission, so guys, get on with it, make kids employable, you've got a new career education standard, it will be launched on the 23rd of September at the Scottish Learning Festival, you've got the Creative Learning Plan, I know nobody's looked at it and hardly anybody's read it, and all of the rest of that, but it's there, there's going to be 2 working parties on that, there's going to be 1 working party on creativity and learning and 1 on creativity and employability, and they'll be publishing stuff as well. You've got the ongoing implementation of Curriculum for Excellence, the task that continues to ask. Because let's face it, guys, Curriculum for Excellence is that one curricular initiative that's never going to be finished. It's been informed by the Trotskyist theory of permanent revolution. And we've now set up things called the CLTAs, because the government loves Scrabble. And we've set up the CLTAs, you can't whack a good acronym, the Curriculum Learning, Teaching and Assessment Groups, and they're beavering away in this permanent culture of ongoing curriculum development, right? And then you've also got new hires, right? So some people have moved over to them in higher maths, they've done brilliantly, they've scored their kids passed with 34. And kids who sat the old hire, they can get much closer to 50. Funny that'll really bring people over in droves to the new hire. I can't presume I can, he's shit at English, but I think he could get 32. You know what I mean? Is there a point being made here? And then we've also got raising attainment. So everybody's going to be coming around asking you to what extent you're managing to close the gap. Something that's defeated us for the past 50 years. Right? Every initiative that we've developed, every development of good practice has benefited good practitioners more than poor ones. So what has happened with virtually any development that we've undertaken and instituted in Scotland is that people who are already doing well have taken it on and done better with it. Schools which are struggling with the old models have been incapable of gaining full advantage from the new ones. So what we've seen through improvement is a general rise in standards, but an equally widening development of that gap between the most advantaged and disadvantaged schools. Just a really, really interesting model. But what will happen with that is people will now be held to account. People will now be held to account. And we've now got a conversation going on about the introduction of a performance framework which looks pretty much like some form of national testing. Right? Now, in 1974, and I know I was there, 1974, Bullock, in the Bullock report, funnily enough, said that if all teachers were adequately skilled in the assessment of young people, I would see no purpose in the use of standardised testing. And what we've done in the 40 years since that report was published is to continue to invest massively in standardised testing and not really significantly invest in the development of teacher skills and assessment. We use moderation, but we don't evolve it, rather, into a performance framework. We don't work together through that monitoring framework to establish a performance framework that we could use to actually monitor and check progress. We go for the easy option, which will be the buying in of standardised tests, which simply reinforce norm referencing. And that's the route that we're moving on. We're talking about change, but reinforcing tradition. And one of the things that I've been talking about in the blog that I'm doing just now for the Times Ed with Tim Brickhouse, I was describing the experience that I had when I first started as a marker, where the chief examiner actually stood up and he said, "Don't worry, as long as the clever bairns pass and the stupid ones fail, you'll have done your job." He never even mentioned in which subject they might be clever. Right? So in effect, and that's what we did when we dropped the pass rate, that was an absolute denial that there was a single shred of criterion referencing in the maths exam. That's all it was an absolute denial that there was any performance-related judgment being made about maths. All you had to do was work out where you needed to put the pass mark to get the bell curve undisturbed. And that's where we're heading. Now, I asked you, where is the research that tells you that's a good idea? You know? Because not only that, but when you do all that stuff, you probably have to do it in Scots now, because that's another priority. We'll all have to start speaking Scots. We had 4 development officers in Scottish language. 4 development officers in Scottish language. More we had for science. Right? So we had 4 folk, Rome and Milan, trying to get folk to say scunner. And I mean, I don't know how they felt about it. Feckin' Skinner, really. I mean, what is vernacular Scots as a language? Absolutely beyond me. I moved to Fife, I couldn't understand anybody. Right, you know, whatever they were talking about, oh, how do you do? Are you okay? I was the only thing I could make out. But anyway, you'll be doing that, and you're lucky if you're not forced to do it in Gaelic. I mean, there are railway stations with Gaelic names where people never spoke Gaelic. I mean, the trains when they were Gaelic. What's going on here? But these are all the obsessions that we've currently got. And budgets are slashed. Right? All this stuff we're being asked to do, you'll be doing it with less people. Where's the research that says that's a good idea? And some constants around that in the Scottish context. There's what I think we've seen. I think that we've seen in Scotland education reform that's been ambitious and radical in concept. And I've no doubt about that. The Howey Report was a radical document. Higher Still was less radical, and Higher Still in implementation wasn't radical at all. Standard grade started off with 3 multidisciplinary subjects. They didn't survive the first decade. Right? So all of the radical elements that were there in standard grade when it was brought in all went and were the first casualty. Now again, I'm not arguing that we need to pursue the new and the radical and the novel. The point I'm making is that why do we have this pattern? And part of it, I think, is to do with this element of hubris, that the Scottish system could still be worse. So what happens with the Secretary of State is that they back off in the face of 2 things. One, that they might undermine the myth that a Scottish education is a thing of wonder, which they're fond of espousing. I mean, one of the reasons why we didn't make headway with Curriculum for Excellence was nobody knew what we were supposed to be doing. Because at 1 minute you were being told that it was just the development of good practice, and 2 minutes later you were told it was the most radical change in a generation. Can it be both? Right, so that lack of clarity, I think, and that sense of hubris prevents us from making change. And there's been no role for research in that. It's been a change that's been delivered on the basis of advocacy. And I think what we also need to recognise is that there is a solid base for research. It's really interesting when you get into this kind of community and some of the discussion, because a lot of what we talk about in this is micro-research. And an awful lot of the discussion and the conversation that we have around research ed is around neurological research, rather than what would have traditionally been regarded as educational research. And I do understand the overlap, and I do understand the difference. But actually, in terms of research, in school effectiveness and school improvement, there have been no significant breakthroughs since the heydays of the 1970s and 80s. If you wanted to look back at the ICSE conferences, you would find dramatic, interesting, engaging, and quite sweeping papers around education effectiveness and improvement, going back 2 or 3 decades. What you will find now is much more specific, limited, narrow papers focusing on very particular types of research. And what the research is telling us fundamentally is that schools do make a difference, but it's concentrated more in some areas than others. The work that Peter Mortimer and the others did in that groundbreaking research around school matters in 15,000 hours, the first research to actually determine that there was a school effect, came back talking about things that affected change, and actually I don't think anything much has changed from that. And it was wonderful listening to my colleagues from Hutchie Grammar doing their session, because they talked about the importance of that involvement of teachers through research, and had a highly sophisticated and structured model for doing that. But all of that stuff, I think, interestingly, bog standard. And a lot of it, yeah, I'm coming. You're okay, I've got a video to show you, stuff to do, and people can just walk out if they don't like it. So anyway, there's all that stuff going on. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get back, I think, to recognising that we need to do what works. And to a certain extent, we need to stop worrying, perhaps, about finding out so much about what works. David Reynolds' work, I think, would stand up to comparison with anything that was being currently published. So his idea about what actually matters being how much we care about kids and how much we structure and plan what we do. There's an awful lot that doesn't require novelty. You know, I remind people, I would, if I wasn't so quick on this clicker thing, and I know I'm running out of time, but Barber's trawl of educational research, which just flashed below your eyes, I'm sure you picked up on it subliminally, but Barber's research saying that out of all of the things that came through in the research, the one largest impact of pupil attainment was classroom organisation and the skills of the teacher. So why are we not focusing more on that in the lessons that we know about it? Why aren't we making sure that we develop assessment that rewards the practice that we encourage? Why aren't we making sure that when kids sit higher English, we actually learn something about how good they are at English and not simply how generally able they are? Why have we not had a correlation in Scotland between performance in standard grade English and higher English that was worth a damn? To get a correlation between standard grade performance and the performance in any single higher subject, you had to aggregate all the subjects together. You couldn't get a subject-to-subject correlation that was worth relying on. Something far wrong with that. Why aren't we focusing on a clarity about goals and looking at baselines around that and researching on it and making sure that we've got the benchmarks before ambition? And when we deal with research, because it is hard and there are contradictions around, when we're dealing with research, let's make sure that we apply these three filters to them. Let's make sure that when we look at stuff that comes through, we set it against our values. I could come across mountains of research which told me that intelligence was predetermined and fixed. I would continue to ignore it because what it does is it obviates hope. I would continue to do it in the hope that that research was wrong, because in terms of what it does to children's futures, it's absolutely wrong. Better to try in the face of incorrectness than give up on children's lives. And I think as we go through that, we need to recognise that perhaps it's more important, as the colleagues at Hutchie were talking about, to get people involved in researching rather than simply engaging with research. That it's not just about taking from the words of the maestros. We need to engage in the process. We need to interrogate our own experience and learning. And the myth of Sisyphus is Camus' article about how one exists and continues in a godless world. And Camus' answer is we do it through the invention of purpose. And what we've got to do, rather than worry unduly about much of what we're discussing, is be really clear about what our purpose is. To be really clear about our ideology, not being an ideologue, not devoting ourselves to one avenue, but being prepared to look at both macro research and micro research. Being prepared to engage with the work, to get in the game. And as colleagues at Hutchie are doing, getting other colleagues engaged too. And just remember, these are the teachers we remember, those who inspired us most because of what they cared about and that they cared about us and who we might become. I'm like, well, I am. Let's start asking the question, guys. Where's the love? How much have we heard about love today? Been a lot of research. Been a lot of academia. What have we heard about love? I spoke to a guy yesterday. A guy came out of poverty. Genuine, normal human being that came out of it. And he said the only thing he needed to make a difference in his life was somebody to ask him every day how he went through it. And nobody bothered their backside because they were so busy teaching their subject and engaging with their pedagogy. Care's part of that pedagogy. And as we do it, we've got to recognise that ultimately our task is to make sure that our young people have an education which is characterised not simply around attainment and not simply around that capacity to pass exams, make decisions and get access to other qualities. This is the entitlement our children have.
A million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mil of strain, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people here are singing bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching,
A song written about a strike by women textile workers at the beginning of the 21st century, beginning of the 20th century, where they struck to get better material conditions. They struck for bread. So the song talks more simply about bread. It talks about roses. The people portrayed singing there are not academics. They're not middle class people. They are working people from a mining community in South Wales captured with brilliant film called Pride. And their commitment and their entitlement is to bread and roses. And what we've actually done in many of our communities is we've not only destroyed their material well-being, we've destroyed the culture that made their lives rich. Whatever we think about research, our children deserve a life where richness matters as much as wealth, and we need to find better ways of guaranteeing that, but we must not be held back from that purpose. Because for laughter, love and beauty, the guiding spirits too. The people march for bread, but they march for roses too. And ladies and gentlemen, if you go out of here with no other thought, go out with the thought that whatever we decide works, let's for the love of God make it work, because you have the capacity to make such a difference for so many children and young people and to touch their lives. Let's not make it an academic and arid exercise. Let's not be told the shallow polemics of the politician. Let's actually engage with our profession and each other. And in the words of the legendary New Orleans saxophonist, trombone shorty, let's email me, let's follow me on Twitter, if you're desperate at any stage, that's my mobile number, guys. It's always available. And ladies and gentlemen, there's a trombone shorty. You and I, let us see our battle cry. Pick me up if I should fall. We can never stop us all. Right, that's the message. Go out in this solid group of children,